I came up with three different categories of the difference between manufacturing close by and offshore. First one is offshore manufacturing creates misunderstanding. If there's a fog of war, there certainly is a fog of offshore. Things, for example, we manufacture in China, and I've been manufacturing in China for other companies for probably 10 years or so. And you learn early on that how business is done and who you're talking to is different. Not necessarily bad, but it's different. For example, very often the person that meets you in your closest relationship in China is the person that speaks English the best, not the person that has the best answer to whatever your questions are. So there's a translation that goes between you and the English-speaking people and them and whoever they need to talk to in their company. Is it the engineer, the finance person where you're getting a price, their supplier management person that's finding you a component? You don't get to talk to that person, you talk to the intermediary. So there are all sorts of misunderstandings that come out. Misunderstandings about your requirements for quality. What are your expectations and how do you communicate that? When you're doing it 6,000 miles away, it's a lot different than when you're talking to somebody that's much closer. Delivery, cost, we all know how difficult it is to do that. There are also these other requirements that come up. I call these my knockout requirements. I have to find out, can my offshore supplier do these or not? In other words, am I getting Ross components if I need them, and how do I know I'm getting them? Since I'm not on the factory floor, I can't do the audit, I can't look for the ROAS on the boxes. How do I know I'm getting them, and what's my process for doing that? And you can pretty much go down that list. Conflict minerals is becoming more important. How do I manage that offshore? The EICC, if you know the the Electronic Industry Council, they have a set of social and environmental requirements. Are prisoners making my part? Are 14-year-old people making my part? How do I know that? So I don't end up in the newspaper at the end of the day. That's an important process that you need to have in place to ensure that your expectations and requirements for that are being fulfilled. Data protection and now safe harbor, information going back and forth. How do you protect that? Quality process and results, getting good information about the process that you're going through, your manufacturing process. So things like CPK, yield rates, DPPM, if that's important to you, it probably should be. Are they measuring it for you? What sort of reports do you get? What do you do with them? What's the conversation take place? How frequently? Communicating, again, the requirement for that. Business licenses, although not anymore. When I started, China was very much the Wild West. People were making stuff and exporting things that they didn't have a license to do. There's a lot of what's known as guanxi, so people are doing things for each other and you don't know about half of them. I had one where parts were being delivered in the back of a station wagon. Where they came from, I didn't know, but they were going into my part. You know, I happened to be there when they showed up. That's the only way I knew. So how do we understand that whole supplier development part? Dangerous goods program, we have a lithium battery in one of the products that we make. That seems to change day to day, how you can ship it, how many you can ship, how do you have to package it, where do you get them in China, and how are they manufacturing them? So that's become a headache. And then the sea shipping requirements, the safety requirements of shipping these days. So a lot of misunderstanding, more than just the quality, cost, and delivery of your part. So you have to think about everything, all of your requirements, not just the part itself. Going offshore creates risk. I tried to put together, this is something I did a number of years ago. I'm an old quality guy, so I kept thinking, well, risk, then there's some kind of a FMEA solution for that, if you all know what a failure mode effects analysis is. And so I started to create a FMEA for supplier risk. And I have it completed sort of in a generic way. If people want copies of it, you can send me an email. I'm happy to share it. I came up with these critical characteristics of a supplier. In other words, if you think about it from a DFMEA, from a design FMEA, what are the characteristics of the supplier that they need to deliver to me to be successful? Like if you're doing a DFMEA on a part, what's the part need to be able to do to be successful? You list those out, then you look at how can it go wrong, what's the impact of it going wrong, and that. So I followed the same train of thought for a supplier. So for a supplier, I need robust finance and business systems. If I'm looking for a supplier offshore, I need to know how well are they funded, what sort of assets do they have, do they actually own all the equipment that I'm looking at on the shop floor? And believe it or not, who actually owns this place? What's the governance of it? There are a lot of suppliers I would go into, and as you ask questions about who actually owns it, you find out it's somebody in Taiwan actually owns the thing. Well, I've never met and I have no control over it. And so I have in the past in other companies had product delayed because somebody made a decision about who's getting that line. Somebody who I never talked to and I didn't even know existed. And so that's who owns this place. An effective quality system, that's goes without saying. An active sub-tier supplier management. As I said, how are they picking their suppliers? Is it this Guanxi? It's my uncle that's got a plastic injection thing in his garage and he's going to go make my parts for me. If you have outsourced, if you're doing plating, if there's some kind of painting or some outsourced, where's that being done? How's that being done for you? And so how does your supplier then manage those, and how do you understand how they're doing it? Controlled manufacturing process, that's just, usually that's part of a quality audit. You take a look at how they do it and how they manage, what's their record keeping. And professional engineering and program management, especially for startups, product launch. Who else is going to be around there? How many people do you need to send to support that? What sort of engineers, and what's their experience in launching product? You're going to do a design for manufacturing. You're going to go to them and say, can you work with me on this DFM? And if there's nobody there that's that expert in it, you're on your own. And you find out about how tough it is to manufacture 2 months into it, which is a bad place to know that. And then other characteristics. So if those are what you need from the manufacturer, what is it that they actually deliver to you in each one of those? What's the risk if that deliverable isn't successful, if what you expect? The impact on you if one of these things goes wrong, and then the supplier's verifiable evidence to manage this. So that's what I go audit, is the one on the bottom. When I go audit, I've gotten to that point by trying to figure out what's important for me to look at, and I base that on risk. So an FMEA would be, I only use 2 out of the 3. I don't do frequency so much. I figure if it's there all the time or none. So it's how critical is this to me, and what's the impact on me? How severe is it? Is it going to put me out of business or not? So again, I've got that built out into a spreadsheet. If y'all want to see it, just drop me a line. And then the third one, being an old automotive guy, I worried a lot about lean manufacturing and creation of what the lean guys call muda in your process. Muda is wasted time, basically. You're wasting an asset. Things aren't going as they want. And so the mudas that Toyota Production System calls out are these 7 mudas. One is muda of inventory. In other words, I'm making more somewhere in my system than it needs. Ideally, a perfect manufacturing system is one-piece flow. It goes all the way through, and I sell one, and then I go make another one, and I sell that one. Well, as soon as you start breaking your process up, so it's in separate countries, now you've got inventory that's got a flow between those, and you're adding that muda of inventory. So that means you got to manage it, or that'll get way out of control, and that's all adding cost to your operations. And so how are you going to keep track of that muda? How are you going to manage that inventory? So we have inventory on the water. Usually, if it's in the air, then that's another kind of muda of what that costs to get it to you. Inventory to cover any kind of shipment risk. Raw materials and WIP inventory to cover forecast accuracy mistakes. If you got more than one SKU, then you got a couple of different things you got to manage. If you get your forecast wrong, you got the wrong parts in the warehouse, you got to change it. It's harder to do from China than it is locally. So you have all that added cost. Usually you start to mitigate that risk by adding either work in process. I build up a bunch of extra boards and I have them sitting there so I can make I can postpone those and make different SKUs out of them. Or I have a bunch of raw materials that I can quickly turn into finished goods if I get my forecast wrong. And so that's all inventory. I paid for all that. So that's added cost. And then there's other sorts of carrying costs. Again, usually product is free on board at the contract manufacturer. And so I own it while it's all downstream from there. Does that make sense to everybody? Like
while it's in the container, you already bought it.
Right?
It's off the hands.
There it is. That's mine. And I had to insure it. You know, I had to pay for it. I had the funds. I don't get paid for it until it gets somewhere that I can sell it to a customer. So it's mine, whether I need it or not. It's mine. Muda of overproduction. In other words, making the wrong stuff. And that has to do with forecast accuracy. Forecast gets less accurate the further out you are. So if I have 5 or 6 weeks on the water, I just added 5 or 6 weeks to my forecast. And so I'm going to be less accurate than I was if I can order it, make it, and have it a week later rather than 6 or 7 weeks later. And so I'm going to be wrong. And because of that, I'm making the wrong stuff on a percentage basis, but I'll guarantee I'm making the wrong stuff. And I know I'm making the wrong stuff. I just don't know how bad it is. Poor forecast accuracy due to the expert transportation time, which I just talked about. And then also an inefficient end of life or a phase in, phase out process. Again, when you have all that added time, you're trying to time things. So when I make some kind of a cut in or I'm changing from one part to another, I get those times right. Or I end up with 5 weeks of the wrong stuff that I own that's now slow moving or obsolete or whatever that I got to do something with. Okay? So time is the big one on this. Muda of correction, that's the rework part. And rework can be a headache. You either have a 3PL somewhere in the world closer to your customers that can do rework for you, or you have to send it all the way back to the factory to get that done. And rework of prototypes, samples, parts, whatever they are. There's 4 more mudas and then I'm done. One of the big mudas is movement, and that's people, and that's sending engineers and others to your contract manufacturer, your offshore site. You'd be surprised how often you have to do that when they have questions, when you have parts to look at, pilot builds, prototypes. They're looking at alternate parts, and so alternate parts are going back and forth, and finally you have to get the engineers together. Periodic meetings like QBRs, quarterly business reviews, where you sit down and you go over the data and how are we doing as a company to company. Sending people over. Anyway, there are a lot of folks that go back and forth, and you have to take that into account when they're off-site. Muda of transportation, we talked about, of shipping things around, either airship or ocean ship. It takes a while. Cost of shipping fees and insurance. Import duties, if you make it in the US, there's no import duty, you made it here. So there's those added costs. Especially in IoT, which I'm finding out. I came from automotive, so I'm in now this smart home IoT world. And when I made car parts, everybody knew what a brake looked like, or a carburetor, or a side panel. I mean, we all knew what those were. Try and show a bureaucrat a smart 9-volt battery that has wireless and a regulated power supply in it, which is something that we make, and they have no idea what it is. And trying to get the right duty classification on that, and trying to get it to the airport so they can ship the thing, they don't understand what it is. And this is not a trivial thing. I have spent months trying to just get the part from China to the United States because nobody will tell me what it is. what tax I need to pay on it, what duty I need to pay on it, whether or not the airlines will ship it, how I have to have it packaged, because they don't know what it is. It's brutal. Extra costs of air shipping and then expediting samples and prototypes. We do that all the time. Anybody here work with a marketing person that's the first words out of their mouth, well, let me see a sample. And so if you want to change the color from this white to that white, you don't get to do that without, well, let me see a sample. And so the samples are coming from China, and they're always a couple of days, and sometimes the airlines get angry at them and hold them up somewhere. And now it takes a week. And so when we had seen about new product introductions and samples are taking a week to go back and forth, that's real time. That pushes you out. Muda of waiting, that's part of the samples going back and forth. 24-hour delays in email communications. If I send an email right now to China asking for an answer, I'm not going to get it until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I don't read it until tomorrow morning unless I really need the answer, and then I'm reading it at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then muda of over-processing, which is doing extra stuff that a customer's not going to pay for. Most of this muda is extra stuff that a customer doesn't want to pay for anyway. But there's specific things like extra packaging, where you take your part, you put it in a package or a master carton that goes to a 3PL somewhere, and then you throw all that out. You had to pay for all that, and the customer doesn't care how they got it. They don't want to know that there was special packaging that had to get certified and tested. So those are the big three things that I worry about. Misunderstandings, risks, and these sorts of mudas that add cost. So, thank you.
Thank you.